Folks, I'm covering off CloudWatch today in AWS, namely installing the CloudWatch Agent on a Linux and Windows EC2. CloudWatch at a high level, folks, allows you to monitor the AWS resources for any health issues, and you can react to those health issues based on various alarms through CloudWatch or events through EventBridge, formerly CloudWatch Events. And there's a multitude of things you can do with CloudWatch, folks. It's a big beast in itself. You know, I always say, there's people that are experts in various things in AWS, and I recently heard on an AWS podcast that S3, for example, is integrated with over 230 services, folks. CloudWatch itself as well has got a lot of integrations. So to go through them all is beyond the scope of this tutorial, folks, but just know that don't put pressure on yourself to become an expert on everything. I've used this here in the real world, and there's a multitude of people involved, folks. There's people involved with actually installing the CloudWatch Agent, and then there's people involved with actually setting up the CloudWatch Agent dashboards, namely system administrators, so then the correct events can be acted upon, or the correct information can be read and then utilized to debug issues in your system. Okay, so don't feel pressurized to know everything about this here. Like I always say, if you can open up Google and research it, there's a multitude of documentation like you see on the screen here that can help guide you and get the answers that you need. Okay, so we'll look at the Terraform code, folks, that I've got set up here. This is a basic setup. Do not take this verbatim as being highly secure or, set up in a way that's going to give you an all singing and all dancing Terraform config, folks. I've set it up here to pull a multitude of modules and set up various resources for me in the AWS ecosystem. All right, I've already ran this here using Terraform init, Terraform plan, and Terraform apply. And I'll just give you a quick rundown of what this does. So the first module here, it gives us an opportunity to set up the AWS CloudWatch Agent config file in SSM parameter store. It'll also give us the run commands here for Linux, to install the CloudWatch Agent on a Linux EC2. All right. In the config file itself, folks, do not take this verbatim as what you need for a config file to set up a CloudWatch Agent and monitor these metrics. There's a multitude of metrics you can set up. And at a basic level, CloudWatch allows you to monitor the basic stuff on an EC2 before you install the agent, folks. For example, your CPU, disk, and network ones. Whenever you install the agent, you'll get a far more in-depth look at operating system metrics, folks, all right, to do with memory and all these other ones to do with CPU and disks and so on. You can look through the documentation. As I say, folks, there's a multitude of it there. There's the docs there that'll allow you to look at the metrics collected by the agent. Okay, so the CloudWatch events as well, folks, here. I've set this up to actually trigger the reinstallation of the CloudWatch Agent if someone goes into the Systems Manager parameter store and edits the config file. So that new config file then, if they want to add a different metric, then gets reinstalled in with the agent, folks. Okay, so you could automate this a multitude of ways. As I say, more than one way to skin a cat. There's other ways of doing this as well. There's actually pre-set up ways of installing the CloudWatch Agent and CloudFormation, folks, in the AWS documentation, but you might want to cater it to a specific need of yours. Or if you're only working with Terraform in your project, then you might want to do it your way and set it up in Terraform. But more than one way to skin a cat, folks. Okay, so this is setting up the event rule, and then I've got one set up here. As you can see, just going back, there's one set up for Windows and one set up for Linux in each case, folks. Okay, that's the way I've done it here. I'm just showing you the Linux ones. And this one here will actually trigger and send us a message to our email if the run command fails to install the CloudWatch Agent, folks. So that's a good thing to have as well, especially if you're going to run this command across a fleet of instances. This will then come back. It'll have the document name that's ran. In this case, it'll be the one that's installed, the CloudWatch Agent on Linux. And then this one here is the command ID, folks. And that's very useful because then we can jump back and we can actually go to the exact command that's failed and see which instances that it has failed on. Okay. And we have that message like status will be failed. Okay. And based on that filter of failed, on the run command. Yep, and the document name's there at the top of this file, folks. Install or update CloudWatch Agent on Linux. I have started the framework to actually go and install this field in the CloudWatch metrics, and the logs, folks, for example, in the metrics there can be monitored for keywords, for example, like failed or a multitude. It's a lot more grainier, and you have to play around with it, obviously, to get the exact things that you want to pluck out of those logs, and then you can again act on those metrics. All right, and then trigger things to happen again. If the agent hasn't installed properly, then you could rerun the installation command again. All right, so that's the Terraform covered off, folks. It's a high level. If you haven't covered Terraform before, I'm happy to go over it. If you want, just drop something in the comments. I'm not an expert in it. It doesn't take you a long time to get your head around the basics on it, and it's a very useful infrastructure as code tool, similar to CloudWatch, which is native, or not CloudWatch, CloudFormation, which is native to AWS, to install a multitude of resources, folks. It saves you having to code them. They're there that can be reused over and over, like modules here. Okay, so back in, folks, what I've done to set up this tutorial at the start is I set up two EC2s, a Linux one and a Windows one, as you can see here. I've actually gave the tags a specific name, lin_CloudWatch Agent for the Linux one, and again for the Windows one, similar. Those tags are utilized back in the Terraform code, folks, to actually trigger these events. It triggers the instances that have that tag. So it's a useful thing. Again, if you need to target specific instances, you can put a tag on them, and then these event rules can target them. So whenever the parameter store conf file for the CloudWatch agent to be installed gets changed, it'll rerun on the instances that have these specific tags. All right, so that's those two set up. We can connect into them and actually check that the agent has been installed and is running, and we'll do that in a moment. I just wanted to take you through some of the systems manager stuff. So that session is terminated. I can restart that. This is the document for installing the CloudWatch agent on Windows, and it was exactly the commands that we've seen prior, similar to the Linux ones. And this is what the Terraform created, and this is the Windows one. There's an overview here of the config file like we've seen before. This is actually installed in the Systems Manager parameter store, and if we edit this here, folks, and save it, this will then be triggered by the CloudWatch event rule, and that event rule is over here. It's called trigger config Linux, and you can see the parameter store change. So if I edit that config file, this will rerun actual run command based off the target, and you can see here it's targeting the Systems Manager run command, installing a CloudWatch agent on the Linux instances again. All right, the other one is to actually trigger and send an email to me if the actual command fails. And in this case here, there's a Linux one set up. As we said before, when we've seen it in Terraform, if it fails, I will get then an email, because the target for this is an SNS topic. And in SNS, you can see here, I've subscribed using my email address. And if anything fails, I will get an email. So if I'm out having a coffee and this here's, possibly the run commands on a schedule, folks, you might want to do that, because the Systems Manager can install this run command, can run this run command based off a schedule. So for your CloudWatch agent, it's a agent that could possibly be updated, or is updated actually, for AWS. So it's current and secure with any updates, folks. Okay, so it will need reinstalled. You might want to do this at a specific maintenance time that's outside, the times that your users are using the systems. Or you might want to do it just manually as part of like a patching, event that you do. You're not having these instances down for too long. So that's the rules, folks, at a high level. That's what you can set up, as much automation as you can around it, to make your life easier. All right. This is the command history, folks. These here have already ran. So they have the CloudWatch agent in Windows and Linux here has ran the installation of it using this run command, and it was successful. The failed ones here were actually failures that I actually triggered. I gave the run command, and I'll do it in this tutorial to show you the command actually failing, and then an email coming through to notify me that the command has failed. What we'll do first here is we'll actually go in using the session manager on the EC2s and actually see that the actual CloudWatch Agent has installed successfully. Okay, so we can do that there on the Linux CloudWatch Agent here by just selecting the Linux agent by this little checkbox on the side here, and we can then go to connect. And we're in here now, folks. Okay, and if we go back to, for example, our Terraform, I've got a README file, and inside this README file are just a couple of commands that we can use to check the status of the agent. So on the Linux one, it's this command here. And again, folks, you can get these commands from the good AWS documentation. So on our Linux command line, folks, we're then going to check if the CloudWatch agent has installed and it is running. And if we use this command here, we can see there that the CloudWatch agent is running and it has been configured. Now, folks, with the configuration, that is using the config file that I mentioned about in the Systems Manager parameter store. And then you can use that there configuration to then set up your CloudWatch dashboards based on what metrics you're measuring. Okay. If we then look at the Windows EC2, I've already connected using the session manager, which you can do through here. I've got a session opened. I've already got the command in here. I hit enter there. And we can see also that the Windows CloudWatch agent is up and running, and it has also been configured too, folks. So from here, what we can do then is look at editing our config file and then seeing the actual run command being triggered using the event bridge rule we looked at earlier, folks. For a good practice here as well, folks, it will give you some guidance in the AWS documentation to actually set up good paths for your actual parameters. Here you can see it's pretty understandable, CloudWatch Agent Linux. You may want to set up different configurations though and give these meaningful names and then give it good paths, folks, so that then you can follow these paths nice and easily as your parameter store starts to fill up. All right, but let's go into the Linux one here. What we'll do is we'll just click edit. We won't actually edit anything, folks. We're going to trigger the API call to the event bridge rule to run and reinstall the CloudWatch agent on the Linux instance. So if I just click save, then that's going to run the actual run command again. That's us running now, folks. There was a little bit of a lag on that, so we can see the command running. This is reinstalling the CloudWatch agent. I'm picking up the new configuration file, and that's the command executed, and we can see in here that it has executed successfully, folks, and reinstalled that configuration file. Okay. The other one there that we can do, folks, is actually running the command and checking of a failure. All right. What I can do with this one is I create a new version, come down. What I'm going to do is remove all these run commands here. And I'm going to go back to my Terraform and I'm going to go to the README file, and I've already got the actual command set up here that I need to run to actually trigger a failure. So I can go back in here, paste those in. I'll just tidy this up a little bit, give it some indentation. I will create a new version. Go back to this here, the Linux one. I will set that version as a default. Set default version. It'll be number 2 now. Set default version. Let's go back here, owned by me. We can see the contents of this are these new commands, which will basically fail that run command, folks, and give us an email to our email inbox. Okay. So if I go back again and trigger it just by changing the parameter store config file, edit, trigger the API call to the event bridge rule. What we're doing here, folks, is in our rules, if we go back to them, the first one we're doing is triggering the config rule to run the run command again, and then we're triggering the SSM command failed event rule to send us an email to say, right, that's failed. We need to look at the reason why that EC2 has failed. Okay, in this case, we are triggering it, so we know why it has failed. All right, so if we go back to our run commands, what we can see then, folks, is we've got a failed run command. And we can go in here and click on this instance and we check to see why it's failed. So we can see failed to run commands, exit status 1. There's no output there, But what we can do is we know that exit status 1 was in our run command document. Okay, so in our run command document, exit 1, okay, it was failed intentionally by us. All right, so that's just showing us that that has failed. Then we can go to our emails, and in our emails, folks, we have the message that we looked at earlier in the Terraform code. We've got a command ID here. That's really useful for us, because what we can do is we can take that command ID and go back to our run command, stick that in, hit enter, and we'll see that run command that's failed, folks. Okay, and then we can go in and investigate what EC2 has failed under it. When we come in here, we can see that this one is the only one that's failed. What we can do, folks, is we can go in here and actually filter out an instance ID, you know, equals, and give it an actual instance ID if we want to look at a specific one, or we can look at the actual status, in this case, you know, failed, and we can filter out whichever ones have failed and then investigate in depth by clicking on the actual instance ID and seeing why it's failed. You know, in this case, we triggered it. Okay, so that's just some automation, folks, that you can set up with the CloudWatch ecosystem, installing the CloudWatch agent to get our agent installed and monitor those more in-depth operating system metrics, you know, and then work from there, create dashboards like it says here, or just get events sent to us, folks, that we can trigger other things to happen. So if you've got any questions, folks, as always, drop them in the comments, you know, like and follow for more. If you found another way to do this here that's a lot easier than this, what I've shown you, then please share it. I'm always open to learning new things, folks. I'm coachable, as they say, and it's a good way to be in this industry, is be coachable, folks. That will help you move forward and progress in the industry, folks. All right. So I will leave this one with you and wish you all the best. Take care and good luck.